Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome In Defense of Christians Executive Director Andrew Doran.
Good evening. Your eminent beatitudes, holiness, excellencies, and graces, distinguished guests, brothers and sisters from near and far, welcome and thank you for coming. As has been noted in the media and elsewhere, this gathering is historic. Nearly 1,000 Christians from Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and the Holy Land, from Europe, Australia, and the Americas, have joined arm in arm for the Christians of the Middle East. Despite our many differences, we stand in solidarity with them and for them. There is strength in numbers and in unity. There is, of course, as much diversity of opinion as there are individuals. This may seem at a glance to be a source of disunity, but in truth, these divergent views can make our cause stronger if we remember that we all, I hope, share a common goal: to preserve and protect the Christians of the Middle East. Whatever steps will further this end, IDC stands ready to support. In the weeks and months ahead, we will work together to prepare policy proposals that will advance the interests of Christians in the Middle East, and we will heighten awareness in the media through an aggressive outreach campaign in churches and campuses and in the public square. In this, we ask for your help, and we will be here to serve you. This work began in part because of a belief that outside Washington there was ignorance, while inside Washington there was indifference. We are here to put an end to both ignorance and indifference, to inspire Americans to demand action from their elected officials, to see the values of its people reflected in the nation's foreign policy. Washington is very far removed from Egypt's Sisters of Mahdi, from the Good Shepherd Sisters of the Bekaa Valley, from the evangelical pastor in Hazaka, and the countless others who feed and clothe refugees and others in need, Muslim or Christian. Some in this city have asked why Christianity is vital to the Middle East. What's in it for America? The short answer is that Christian institutions provide social services, health care, and education for millions throughout the region, and that this alone does more to prevent violent extremism than can be measured. Christians are not only the doctors, professors, lawyers, and businessmen in their communities. They are also the servants. Their very presence is a source of pluralism that has a moderating influence throughout the region. This is the answer for the policymaker. This is why we have asked groups that do charitable work in the Middle East to display their service work here. This is why we have captured their work in film, in photography, and the written word. The West must see what is lost with each Christian who feels compelled to emigrate, such as those who fled Egypt as churches and homes were burned to the ground last year. As we see today in Iraq and Syria, where ISIS terrorizes Christians and others, driving them from the villages where their ancestors have lived since the first centuries of Christianity. But for the average American, the fact that our brother and sister Christians need our help is reason enough to act. This is what inspired those who made this summit possible through their generosity. This summit is the beginning of many ambitious undertakings. IDC will be a permanent Washington-based advocacy group that will be a persistent presence on Capitol Hill and in the media. IDC will seek to get members of Congress to sign a pledge of solidarity with the Christians of the region, to scrutinize foreign aid to governments that do not protect fundamental human rights, in particular religious freedom. Not merely for Christians, but all persons. And IDC will advocate for reconstructive aid and humanitarian relief, IDC will also form regional offices to see that our work here is carried out at the local level, from Florida to Michigan, from Illinois to California. Of America's 50 states, more than half are represented by Christian diaspora here. There is much to be done, and with your help, we can see it through. Now the work begins. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome In Defense of Christians President Toufic Baaklini.
Good evening, distinguished guests and friends, and thank you all for participating in this unique summit. In Defense of Christians' ultimate mission is to create a forum enabling people like all of us in this room to unite and work for the survival of the Christians of the Middle East. Protecting them and helping them remain rooted in their land is our objective, as well as combating and fanatic terrorism, religious persecution, and political oppression, threatened in their physical existence and spiritual freedom in many troubled areas of the Middle East. Our brothers and sisters are suffering terribly. Our duty, the moral duty of the hundreds of you that are here today from all of the world, is to stand together under the banner of our common cause, the cause of faith, existence, and liberty. Awareness and advocacy are the two fundamental components of IDC's work. Awareness is broadly focused on bringing attention to the United States and the Western world to the plight of the ancient Christians communities of the Middle East. Advocacy is narrowly focused on the U.S. foreign policy decision makers to promote values and policies abroad that are consistent with the American principles and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the United Nations. For too long, the free world has stood by silent, in a state of denial or ignorance, while Christians and other groups endure discrimination, persecution, displacement, and ethnic cleansing. Today, as the Islamic State continues its genocidal campaign against Christians in Iraq and Syria, and in anticipation of further aggression in other surrounding nations, the free nations are finally responding, and hopefully they will act to eradicate this cancer. IDC is here to provide a platform to the voiceless people at their greatest peril, desperation, and need for support. We must act now. The goal of this summit is to empower, motivate, and organize the actions of the diaspora, as well as energizing the American people to stand in solidarity with the ancient Christians communities of the Middle East. The survival and well-being is vital to the stability of the region, and the stability in their countries of origin has national security implications for the United States. The theme of this conference is unity. Finding a common ground to channel our collective efforts will make a difference today and will affect the future of so many suffering Christians. Those of us who live in the United States and the free world enjoy a lot of freedom, stability, and prosperity. Our brothers and sisters in the Middle East should not be deprived of this way of life. Of course, the Middle East may never look like the United States, but we can help create a civil society and institutions based on pluralism, tolerance, dignity, human rights, and democracy. The future of the Christians of the Middle East will depend not on foreign protection, nor on the mercy of oppressive dictatorships or some sort of minority coalition. Modern state building should be the guarantee for equality, power sharing, and coexistence with their Muslim counterparts. It is not an easy task, but we can help, we must help. This summit is not a single event, but the start of a journey together in unity to achieve our goals. To make a difference, we must create a united front, especially so on the Hill tomorrow. We are confident that over the next 2 days, and by the end of this summit, we will solidify our core plan and continuum of action to support our cause. Facing the tyranny and the atheist ideology of communism, St. John Paul II stood once in the old city of Warsaw and told his people, "Do not be afraid." Looking at the leaders of our church present here and feeling the motivation and the faith you all have, I can say, yes, we are not afraid. We are not afraid because the blood of our brothers and sisters in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Egypt, and in the whole Middle East is blended with the blood of our Savior Jesus Christ, and it will flourish faith, love, freedom, unity. God bless you all. It is my great pleasure to introduce former Attorney General of the United States of America, John Ashcroft. When I asked him to join the board of advisors of IDC, he did not hesitate. Most of you know him as the man who boldly led the Department of Justice through the transformation period after September 11, 2001. Terrorist attacks, he subsequently reorganized the department to focus on its #1 priority, preventing terrorism. The tough anti-terrorism campaign he directed and is under unprecedented outreach to the counterparts around the world keep America safe through his tenure and resulted in dismantling the terrorist cells across the United States and over 150 terrorist plots worldwide. I know John Ashcroft as a man of deep faith who has championed the cause of peace, liberty, religious freedoms in America and around the world. And despite the relentless personal attacks he suffered from those who opposed him politically, there have been few leaders who have been as clear and unwavering in defense of life and liberty than John Ashcroft. I know that it's the faith in Christ that is the foundation of his integrity that sustained him through the darkest days after 9/11 and gave him the strength and peace of mind to carry and always do what is right. His commitment to freedom and his faith can be summed up in an answer he gave to a reporter who asked him how he thought history would judge him. And he said, "I'm not concerned with the judgment of history. I'm only concerned with the judgment of eternity." Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, it's my honor and privilege to introduce my friend, the former governor and senator from the state of Missouri, and the former Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft.
It is inspiring to be here with you. I want to thank you for being here. And for those spiritual leaders of faith communities around the world who are here, let me thank you for being here. Your attendance here together, your attendance is a testimony. It's a testimony to the fact that we don't have to be uniform in order to have unity. God is the creator of diversity, but he doesn't expect that diversity to separate us. That can be a basis for uniting us. And what a testimony it was for me to witness the service that just preceded our time together now, and your being here in unity. Thank you, and may the richness of God's blessing attend everything that you do in all of your efforts. I'm reminded of the psalmist who wrote, "How lovely are the feet of those on the mountains who bring good news." Your feet coming to this city, assembling together in unity, brings good news, not just to Washington, D.C., and heavens knows we need good news here, but it's good news for the world. And I'm grateful to you, and I express my deepest appreciation to you for your testimony, for your understanding that liberty is sourced in God. Governments don't grant liberty. God endowed us with liberty at the creation. And God so profoundly respects liberty that he allows us even to choose against God if we would. And it always stuns me to think there are those who want to impose one religion or another on people. Spirituality isn't the stuff of imposition. It's the stuff of inspiration, just as in the creation. In the creation, when, according to the Judeo-Christian understanding, God literally leans over and inspires us, literally shares his breath, the breath of the most noble, the breath of the highest, the breath of the greatest possible potential is in us. So thank you for coming and for reinforcing this notion of freedom. I'm stunned when individuals who want to impose religion on me or on you or on someone else, who want to say basically that God didn't do it right in the creation, that we are going to fix it up for him by imposing God on people when he chose not to impose himself. As a public servant, I was frequently inquired of, did I want to impose my religion as something I would do in government? And I was pleased to say it's against my religion to impose my religion. And the freedom we enjoy is the freedom for us, for each of us to be different. I'm different than you are. And frankly, if I thought you had it all right, I'd be joining you instead of being different from you. I have differences and you have differences with each other. But we are unified in our understanding of the opportunity for men and women to be free. Governments are in the position of imposition. They achieve their objectives by setting thresholds of behavior, and they impose those on individuals. The world of the Spirit doesn't set thresholds of behavior. It doesn't call us to our lowest and least, which is the threshold. The world of the Spirit calls us to our highest and best. That's what Jesus did, and it's not done by imposition, it's done by inspiration. Spirituality operates by model and inspiration, not by mandate and imposition. And we are here because there are those who are the victims of individuals around the world who are victimized because people seek to impose on them their idea of some construct of God or some construct of morality, some construct of human existence. And the Bible, at least my understanding of the Bible, and I certainly never had formal training, but I love the Bible, I love the Word of God, comes to tell us that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us to be an example of inspiration, to call us to our highest and best, not to devalue us to our lowest and least. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for representing a broad community of nations and cultures. I thank you for being here in unity, not uniformity, but in unity. I thank you for understanding the value of liberty. I sometimes think in the United States we have misplaced our fundamental values, particularly in foreign policy, because sometimes we seem to think democracy is the core value. Democracy is a very important value, but it's not the ultimate value. I think liberty is the value with which God endowed us at creation. And I believe that we have to be careful that we don't immediately sanction whatever happens as a result of democracy. Unfortunately, there are people around the world painfully aware of democratic majorities that withdraw and constrain liberty rather than expand liberty. And the core value of the United States in foreign policy, and I hope we can plant this seed as we deal with those involved in government over the course of the next few days, the core value ought to be liberty and freedom. The democracy is a process. Liberty is an outcome. Democracy is a way of developing governance. Liberty is the product. It's the value that's expressed by good governance. And the freedom with which God created us is the kind of freedom that ought to be encouraged. It's time for us to stop sanctioning and supporting and endowing cultures and communities that use democracy to constrict freedom rather than to enhance it and elaborate it. So your being here is a very important matter. It's not just an important matter here in the United States. It's important, obviously, in the Middle East, but it's important around the world. So I thank you. And my prayer goes out in your behalf and in behalf of those individuals around the world who are suffering in the absence of liberty, which should be their rightful and is their rightful condition. And we should not only pray, and it was obviously inspiring to be with you as you were praying, but I like the phrase that one man said, we should pray as if there are no oars and row as if there is no God. We both work and pray, expecting God to intervene, but expecting us to be used in the hands of God to achieve the noble purposes, allowing people to worship God in accordance with their conscience and as they see fit. So thank you very much for your being here. I want to thank Toufic for his kind words about me, but more importantly, I want to thank Toufic and the others who have organized this important conference for helping draw attention and mobilize support for those who have suffered at the hands of those who would distort, otherwise misrepresent, in my judgment, the idea of freedom and the Creator, that we have been brought into existence with the capacity to choose for or against God. The book of Deuteronomy, I think, makes it pretty clear, doesn't it? I call you, set before you this day, heaven and earth, to record the day against you that I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life that both thou and thy seed might live. This is the condition of humanity. We have these choices to make. And I pray that we will make the right choices in unity and in support, defense of the right of Christians and others to worship, and that we would make the kinds of choices that would not just be popular, not just be acclaimed, but they would have eternal value, respecting the Savior who died that we might live. Thank you very much, and God bless
you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Eminence Leonardo Cardinal Sandri.
Before His Eminence gives you his little reflection, I have a surprise, happy surprise for you. A letter to His Eminence from the Secretary of State in the Vatican, giving the best wishes of Pope Francis, and I'd like to read it. To His Eminence Cardinal Leonardo Sandri, Prefect, Congregation for the Oriental Churches. His Holiness Pope Francis sends warm greetings to the organizers and participants of the In Defense of Christians Summit, taking place in Washington, D.C. from 9 to 11 September 2014. The theme of this meeting is very close to the Holy Father's heart. He has often expressed great concern for the situation of Christians who, above all, in many parts of the Middle East, suffer deeply the consequences of regional tensions and conflicts. His Holiness renews his plea that the rights of all, Christians and adherents to other religions, be upheld so that they may live with respect, freely professing their faith without harm to their dignity, without being deprived of the necessities of life, and without being robbed of their future or forced to flee as refugees. The Holy Father encourages everyone to pray for them and urges the international community to make every effort to bring this humanitarian crisis to an end in order to protect all victims of violence and to ensure that the necessary aid reaches those who have been displaced. His Holiness earnestly hopes that this summit, at which representatives of the Oriental churches are present, will bear much fruit in order to ensure and strengthen the presence of Christians throughout the Middle East, where, although a small flock, they are called to fulfill an irreplaceable mission for the good not only of the church, but of society as a whole. As the Holy Father had occasion to say at the plenary assembly of the Congregation for the Oriental Churches last November, quote, "We must not resign ourselves to thinking of a Middle East without Christians. For 2,000 years, they have confessed the name of Jesus and have been fully integrated as citizens into the social, cultural, and religious life of the nations to which they belong." End quote. With these sentiments, His Holiness cordially imparts to all those taking part in this meeting his apostolic blessing. From the Vatican, September 9th, 2014, Pietro Cardinal Parolin, Secretary of State.
Your Holiness, Your Eminences, Your Beatitudes, Your Excellencies, dear participants, I express my deepest gratitude for the invitation to this inaugural meeting of the In Defense of Christians, associations that gathers the heads of the Eastern churches, Catholics and Orthodox, together with other significant representatives of world social and political life, to reflect on the means that the international community can adopt on behalf of the sorely tried peoples of the Middle East. I greet everyone, beginning with Cardinal Ware, the Archbishop of Washington, who has welcomed us in the capital of the United States, together with the Eastern Catholic bishops who work with their respective communities in this nation. I also express my gratitude to all those who have made possible an event whose goals are rooted in solidarity, as is only right for those who, in their fidelity to themselves and to their faiths, are victims of the most unacceptable contempt of religious freedom and of every other human right. May thanks go my thanks go in particular to Ambassador Gilbert Chagoury, who to this end tirelessly does it as most. It is very significant that the meeting is taking place between people of the different Christian denominations and different religions who believe and proclaim the value of the freedom of the human person and of his or her dignity, even in today's at times pressing challenges. Envisaging a reflection of the immense suffering of Christians as of every other religious minority is a sign of providential openness to the world in the wake of that stepping outside the self with which Pope Francis requested of the Church and of people of goodwill in order, like the Good Samaritan, to bend down to tend humanity's wounds. As believers and pastors, we refer to the Special Assembly of the Synod of Catholic Bishops for the Middle East in the year 2010, thinking of the words of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI at the opening of this celebration. I quote, "Looking at that part of the world, the Middle East, from God's perspective means recognizing it is a cradle of a universal design of salvation in love, a mystery of communion which became true in freedom and thus asks men for a response." Today, our brothers and sisters, their communities, the historical sites that have welcomed them for almost 2,000 years, are knocking harder than ever at the door of the nations and are asking to be heard and for intervention. News and images of the terrible events in the Middle East, and especially in Iraq and Syria, not to forget Africa, starting with Nigeria, reach us every day. The Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue listed them in his declaration of last July 12. I quote, "The massacre of people on the sole basis of their religious affiliation, the despicable practice of beheading, crucifying, and hanging bodies in public places, the choice imposed on Christians and Yazidis between conversion to Islam, payment of a tax, jizya, on forced exile, the forced expulsion of tens of thousands of people, including children, elderly, pregnant women, and the sick, the abduction of girls and women belonging to the Yazidi and Christian communities as spoils of war, sabaya, the destruction of places of worship and Christian and Muslim burial places, the forced occupation or desecration of churches and monasteries, the removal of crucifix and other Christian and religious symbols, as well as those to other religious communities, the destruction of a priceless Christian religious and cultural heritage, indiscriminate violence aimed at terrorizing people to force them to surrender or flee." End of the quotation. Personally, I add another detestable form of violence, learned from the dissemination of information by the militants of the self-styled caliphate. The barbaric indoctrination of children of about 10 years old, forced to sing out against the presumed enemies and to carry weapons at an age when they should be able to play and to go to the primary school with their peers. For all these reasons, let us renew the request that all direct or indirect political, economical, and military support of ISIS be explicitly rejected. However, beside the evil and the homicidal lunacy of ISIS, the complicity of a widespread silence that is enveloping the conflict in Syria should be pointed out. Who has never mentioned or denounced, for example, the purchase of 12 or 13-year-old girls taken from Syrian refugee camps and sent as brides, or to be more explicit, as goods to certain countries? Might the theory of the clash of civilization have been confirmed? It is perhaps an act of war between Islam and Christianity. I do not share this position, and I ask, on the contrary, that it never prevail. One thinker stated, I quote, "It is my hypothesis that the fundamental source of conflict in this new world will not be primarily ideological or primarily economic. The great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. Nation states will remain the most powerful actors in world affairs, but the principal conflict of global politics will occur between nations and groups of different civilizations. The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics. The fault lines between civilizations will be the battle lines of the future." You know, is the very well-known writer Samuel P. Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations. In fact, in these months, certain people are unfortunately intended to destroy not so much a foreign Christian culture in comparison with a native Islamic Arabic culture, as rather the clear reality of a respectful and useful cultural coexistence. In the Syrian or Iraqi homelands themselves, after the great Assyrian, Babylonian, and Persian empires, the Christian presence in all its manifestations has been a constitutive element for 2,000 years, just as the Muslim culture has developed after 6 centuries, likewise in accordance with different denominational divisions. The same applies to the religious presence that preceded Christianity and continues to exist to our day in certain Middle Eastern contexts in such consistent and obvious terms. The West often falls into the trap of viewing the Arab culture as entirely Muslim, forgetting that most Islamic believers do not speak Arabic and do not belong to the Arab culture. Moreover, in textbooks, the arrival of Aristotelianism in the West, thanks to the mediation of Arab and Islamic philosophy, is often mentioned, but almost nothing is said of the preceding indispensable work carried out by the Syriac-speaking Christians, monk, who translated the works of the giants of Hellenistic thought from Greek into Arabic. It is impossible, above all, to quell the doubts about how the vast economic interests at stake affect the conflict. I limit myself to remembering one of Pope Francis' many references, the one he made at the Angelus on September 8, 2013, the day after the prayer vigil for peace in Syria. I quote, "And the doubt always remains It is war, or that war, because wars are everywhere, really a war to solve problems, or it is a commercial war for selling weapons in illegal trade? These are the enemies to fight, united and consistent, following not other interests than those of peace and of the common good. End of the citation. As well as the arms trade, we might add the control of oil, wells, and of gas deposits, the safety of the petroleum and gas pipelines, the supremacy of one area of free commercial trade over another, and this is not only in the Middle East, but also in Eastern Europe and in other regions of the world. In practice, it is the culture of waste, often denounced by the Pope, that dominates in the face of personal economic interest, in the face of one's own idea, the other person with his or her life and inviolable dignity becomes secondary and can even be annihilated or at least not taken into account. On the contrary, the other person is a human being ab origine, and not because the state, the constitution of any other group must recognize him as such. Therefore, we must insist that it should be the United Nations in New York to become increasingly and transparently the place where decisions are made in which all peoples do not only proclaim but also defend in practice with adequate resolutions and actions the dignity of the Christians in the Middle East, together with those who belong to every other minority. In recent weeks, the position taken by some spiritual leaders of Islam in the East and in the West seems to be spreading. Let us think of the Grand Muftis of Saudi Arabia and of the Al-Azhar University in Egypt, as well as of several imams of England and Italy. Let us thank them in the hope that their example may be followed by many so that not silence may be equivocal. And let us thank together all those in Iraq, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Bahrain who have worked hard and have offered help and shown willingness to welcome the Christian expelled from the plain of Nineveh. I have news of private individuals who went to the offices of Caritas, Jordan, to take essential goods to the Iraqi refugees to have arrived in the Hashemite kingdom, of offers or others who have striven to assure them full meals or the rent for a year of a certain number of apartments, and also of young people, members of Islamic university groups, who have offered themselves as volunteers at the Caritas centers in order to help the refugees. These acts, for which we give thanks and which we hope will continue to increase. For our part, no one should think that the current situation must cause the withdrawal of all that the Second Vatican Council authoritatively sanctioned in Nostra Aetate, and which the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue have been carried ahead since its foundation 50 years ago, together with the important discernment made in Ecclesia in Medio Oriente, numbers 1928. Present here are several patriarchs, leaders, and fathers of venerable Eastern Catholic and Orthodox churches. Each one of them has offered and is offering through his bishop, priest, men and women religious, seminarian, and faithful a lofty testimony of the following of Christ, who still lives out the passion in his children and in the members of the church, his bride. We are gathered as pastors around a work table, and we cannot sit down yet together at the table of the Eucharistic. The scandal of the division and of Christological and Trinitarian controversies was almost certainly known to Mohammed, even though he also appreciated several monks and priests. It was in recent decades, and particularly under the pontificate of Paul VI and of St. John Paul II, that the reciprocal excommunications with the churches of Byzantine tradition that date back to the East-West Schism were first lifted and later joint Christological declarations were signed with the Syrian Orthodox Church, 1984, with the Coptic Church, 1988, and with the Assyrian Church of the East, 1994. The tragic events in Syria and in Iraq, as well as certain grave episodes that happened earlier in Egypt, anticipated the visible unity of the churches in the mystery of suffering, of martyrdom, and deaths born together. May the Lord help us not to forget this presence, while we let ourselves be guided by the words of Lumen Gentium, the text of the Vatican II Council. The Church, like a stranger in a foreign land, presses for war amid the persecution of the world and the consolation of God, announcing the cross and death of the Lord until he comes. But by the power of the risen Lord, she is given strength to overcome in patience and love her sorrows and her difficulties, both those that are from within and those that are from without, so that she may reveal in the world faithfully, however darkly the mystery of her Lord, until in the consummation it shall be manifested in full light. Since solicitude and fraternal charity brightly reflect the gospel of Jesus, they are a credible response to those who brandish verses of their own scripture to kill those whom they consider infidels, and also because of they themselves are divided among each other. Then, what is affirmed by the Second Vatican Council concerning the Catholic Easter churches, between those churches, there is such a wonderful communion that is variety, so far from diminishing the church's unity, rather serves to emphasize it. These words can be a visible sign for everywhere to compose unity in a diversity of form is prophetic sign for today's world. As Benedict XVI said in his video message in preparation for his visit to the United States in 2008. Indeed, the world has greater need of hope than ever, hope for peace, for justice, and for freedom, but this hope can never be fulfilled without obedience to the law of God, which Christ brought to fulfillment in the commandment to love one another. Do to others as you would have them to do to you, and avoid doing what you should not want them to do. This golden rule is given in the Bible, but it is valid for all people, including non-believers. It is the law written on the human heart. On this we can all agree, so that when we come to address other matters, we can do so in a positive and constructive manner for the entire human community. End of the quote. Jonah, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city. We repeat these words from the book of the Bible, deeply aware of the mosque of the prophet Jonah, a symbolic place for the three great monotheistic religions, the Old Testament for the Jews and Christians, Surah 10 for Islam, was blown up in Nineveh, today Mosul. Let us forcefully repeat with our brothers and sisters that their return to that city and to their lands must be guaranteed on pain of the dissolution of a society that was capable of reciprocal coexistence for centuries. The unjust assailant must be halted, but let us not limit our thinking to the use of force, in some cases necessary alone, and in any case only within the framework of an international agreement under the aegis of the United Nations involving the Arab and Muslim countries. Just as Jonas was sent in order that the hearts of the people of Nineveh might once again return to the Lord, let us do all we can to ensure that the mind, dimmed by violent action in the name of a God who would thus in his turn appear violent as well as irrational, may succeed in making people understand that every form of violence is in opposition to God's nature and to the nature of the human soul. Righteousness and peace will kiss each other, the psalm says. When people understand that God's glory cannot be separated from human life, as the great Bishop St. Irenaeus of Lyon effectively stated, indeed, it cannot be separated, and therefore even less may God's glory be set against the life of men whom he created and renewed and redeemed through his Son. We do not want to believe in a future of the Middle East without Christians, but at the same time, we are sure that the many of them who arrive in the West in search of permanence may be in our great cities, heralds like Jonah, whom God saves, and he is not distant from human history. The God who is love always worked to ensure that despite the most infamous denials of history, we never give up building the civilization of love. In defense of Christians, yes, dear friends, in defense of all Christians, in defense of Jews, in defense of Muslims, in defense of humanity. Many thanks.
Please welcome back Andrew Doran.
Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. This summit has already exceeded our wildest expectations for attendance, and we're already several hundred people beyond capacity for the summit. This is very humbling and very encouraging, and it says a lot about our work. So thank you. I would like to invite everyone now to join us across the hall for a reception in the Ambassador Ballroom, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Thank you.